Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to be I'm going to be presenting on the systematic mapping of studies on the adoption of digital work in developing countries. The overview of the presentation is as follows. I'll first discuss the introduction, then the methodology, results, and discussion, and lastly, the conclusion. So just to give a brief definition of what digital work, because there are different perspectives of what digital work is. But for this particular paper, digital work is defined as the work that is allocated online through the use of algorithms, so which will be on digital work platforms. So this kind of work arose due to increase in connectivity, an increase in business process outsourcing, as well as an increase of individuals looking for work online. So there is a perception of the potential of digital work contributing to addressing some of the issues in developing countries, which one of them is unemployment. So there are two types of digital work. So firstly, there is the web-based digital work, which is sourced online, and also the services are delivered online. And then there's the location-based digital work, which is where work is sourced online, but it's delivered at particular locations. So an example being transportation and accommodation. We are all familiar with Uber and Airbnb. So the focus for this particular systematic mapping was web-based digital work, because that's what a lot of papers focus on location-based, and I wanted to focus on web-based just to see what are the gaps in that research area. So to conduct a systematic mapping, there were 5 steps, but just to give a brief definition of what systematic mapping is. So it's also called scoping of studies, which is searching of previous primary studies within a particular field to answer some research questions. So it's driven by research questions, and it is used to provide structure in a particular research area, and it aims to identify the trends and gaps in a particular research area. So particularly in this study, the focus was to give structure for digital work research. So the first stage to systematic mapping is the defining of research questions. The second step is conducting the search, screening of papers, and then using keywords to eliminate some of the irrelevant articles. And then lastly, using the selected articles to map the research. So I'm just going to go through each of the steps one by one. So the research questions are used to assess the need and the validity of the study. So the first research question was, what are the current challenges of digital work, the current drivers? And then the third research question was identifying the acceptance models that were used. And lastly, just finding out what are the benefits that were identified through the primary papers. So an automated search was used, which is where databases were used to search for articles. And then a forward snowball through the use of Google Scholar was used. Key terms were defined, depending, just focusing on digital work according to what it was defined earlier. So the search, the articles were stored in a database management system, reference management system, RefWorks. So through the search through the use of the keywords that were mentioned in the table, um, 1,633 articles were identified, and then from there they were filtered. So just to screen the papers, so the process was through looking at developing country articles that were based on developing countries, and then looking at on implementation, adoption, uptake, benefits, challenges, and theoretical frameworks. So all the articles that were selected were to be written in English, and they had to have conducted a primary data collection. So that was the process that was followed. So the first stage was identifying articles through the automated search, and 23 articles were selected after a full text review. So those 23 articles were used for forward snowballing on Google Scholar, and then they were filtered once again, and 32 articles were selected in the end. So this was a form that was used to extract the data. So just looking at the name of the article, the author, as well as the country where it was conducted, and then the research question, how the research questions were answered was looked at in each of the articles. So the challenges that were identified were lack of infrastructure. So in some developing countries, I think it was also mentioned earlier, where there was a problem with lack of infrastructure in terms of electricity, and also in terms of infrastructure for data access or internet access. So also there was the issue of high data costs, even in places where there was infrastructure. And then there was also a limited access of electricity. I mean, with the example here in South Africa of load shedding. And then there was the issue of lack of resources. So for this work to be done, there's a need for one to have a computer, and also or either a computer or a smartphone. So some people wouldn't be able to participate because they don't have those resources. There was also a lack of technical and interpersonal skills. So there's a need to, the basic need for someone to participate in digital work is for them to know how to use a computer. So that was an issue where some people couldn't do it because they didn't have the skills. And the perception of remote working. So because digital workers cannot say who employed them because they're employed by different people. So there is that negative perception of thinking that they are not doing any work. Then I'll just highlight the working conditions. So working conditions is the problem is that they are seen as independent contractors, but when looking at them, they actually may be classified as employees. So what motivates them, what motivates people to get into digital work could be intrinsic for financial purposes. It could be when one has resources and they need the job, then they would be motivated to do the work. Infrastructure, so where there is appropriate infrastructure, people would be motivated to do the work, as well as social. So social involves the interaction with clients online. So clients from different places. So most of the models that were used were looking at the motivations of the digital workers. And a lot of the articles didn't mention any theoretical model. So the benefits were some people obtained either secondary income or primary income, the flexibility of the work, transferability of skills, and social value. So the organizations mostly gain, they have benefits from this in that they reduce costs. And in developing countries in terms of addressing the socioeconomic issues, as I mentioned earlier, unemployment. just to give potential gaps that were identified. One of them was a development of adoption of a framework for the adoption of digital work in a developing country context, as well as the adoption of digital work in companies and small businesses, which can also take advantage of the benefits for companies as they source work online. So those were my references. Thank you.